moment she heard those words in German, her hand froze on the wine bottle. Because what Sungmin just told that buyer, in a language his own brother Jaewon could not understand, was not just about money. It was not about the contract. It was about a funeral. Jaewon's funeral. And the only person in that entire room who knew his brother had just signed his death warrant was the black waitress refilling his glass. Her name was Amara Williams, and she had exactly 60 seconds to decide whether to stay silent and live or speak and risk everything. Amara Williams straightened her apron for the third time that night and pulled a slow breath into her chest before pushing through the kitchen door of the Obsidian Room. This was not a normal restaurant. Normal restaurants had paper napkins and plastic menus. The Obsidian Room had hand-stitched linen, candles that cost more than her weekly grocery bill, and a silence so heavy you could feel it settle on your shoulders the moment you walked in. The kind of silence that only money could purchase. The kind that communicated, without a single word, that people like her were here to serve, not to stay. But Amara needed this job, so she learned to fit inside it. She learned to move without making sound, to pour wine without making eye contact, to smile at no one in particular. Over the past 6 weeks, she had trained herself into something this restaurant could use without noticing. A presence without a face. A hand that appeared and vanished before anyone registered who it belonged to. Marcus, the floor manager, materialized beside her the way he always did. Without warning, without greeting, without interest in whether she was having a good night or a terrible one. "Table 9, he said, already looking somewhere else. 3 guests. 2 Koreans, 1 German. Private business dinner. The wine is already breathing. You go in, you pour, you clear, and you do not exist. Understood?" Amara nodded. Understood. She had received that instruction so many times the words had lost their edge. You do not exist. Fine. Existing was expensive. As long as the money reached her mother Gloria's medical account at St. Catherine's by the end of the week, Amara could disappear as completely as anyone required. She loaded the tray, squared her shoulders, and walked toward table 9. The private dining area of the Obsidian Room sat behind frosted glass panels and floor-length velvet curtains. It was a kind of space designed for conversations that could not happen anywhere else. Where the walls were thick, the staff were trained to hear nothing, and the noise of the city outside felt like something from another world entirely. Amara drew back the curtain and stepped inside. 3 men occupied the table. The first sat at the head, Korean, early 40s. He had the kind of eyes that move through a room slowly and completely, the way a man's eyes move when years of survival have taught him that danger rarely announces itself. Dark suit, no tie, a single silver watch that caught the candlelight without trying to. Everything about him was measured, precise, contained. This was Jaewon-oh. Amara did not know his name yet, but she knew the type the moment she saw him. She had grown up watching men like him from a careful distance. Men whose names were spoken quietly, if at all. Men who did not need to raise their voices because the room already understood what they were capable of. The second man sat to Jaewon's right. Younger, with the same sharp features and Korean bone structure. Family, clearly, but the similarity ended there. Where Jaewon was contained, this one could not keep still. He adjusted his jacket. He turned his glass. His smile came and went too freely. Too automatically, the smile of someone running a performance rather than sitting through a dinner. This was Sungmin-oh, Jaewon's younger brother. He kept a leather folder balanced on his lap and carried the relaxed expression of a man who had already decided he was the most intelligent person at the table. The third man was German. Wide shoulders, pale steady eyes, silver hair cropped neatly against his head. He sat across from the old brothers with the upright posture of someone for whom serious business was a way of life. A stack of printed documents rested before him, edges flush and perfectly aligned. Klaus Richter. He had not flown across an ocean for a casual dinner. What sat inside those documents, what both sides had spent months negotiating, was a $5 billion agreement. The kind of deal that restructured companies. The kind that made careers or ended them. The kind where every single word on every single page was supposed to mean exactly what it said. Amara moved to the table without a sound, lifted the wine bottle, and began to pour. No one looked at her. Good. That was exactly how it was meant to work. But then Klaus Richter leaned slightly forward and spoke to Sungmin in German, and something inside Amara's chest detonated without warning, because she caught every word. She'd always caught every word. Her father, Dr. Amara Williams, had given 20 years of his life to cultural liaison work between the United States government and various European institutions. Before Amara completed high school, she had lived across 4 countries. Germany had claimed 3 of those years, long enough for the language to stop being something she studied and become something she simply carried. The way you carry your name. The way you carry the memory of a place that shaped you before you were old enough to choose it. She had locked that part of herself away a long time ago, along with everything else the old life had left behind. But the German language did not respect locks. The moment she heard it, it moved through her like water, finding the path it had always known. Fast, and arriving completely without hesitation. Klaus said, "Before we go further, I need to confirm the profit split one final time. My lawyers raised concerns about the figures this afternoon." Sungmin nodded with smooth confidence and turned to face Jae-won. He says he is very satisfied with how the deal is structured and is looking forward to moving things ahead. Amara's hand lost half its speed on the wine bottle. That was not what Klaus had said. Not even close. She finished the pour, placed the bottle down without a sound, and returned to her position along the wall. Her expression gave away nothing. Her breathing stayed even. But underneath all of it, something that had been dormant for years had opened its eyes. She told herself it was a simplification. Translators trimmed sentences to keep things flowing. It happened. It did not have to mean anything sinister. Then Klaus spoke again. The arbitration clause. We had agreed on a neutral international tribunal. The contract your team submitted places jurisdiction with Korean courts exclusively. That contradicts everything we discussed. Sungmin listened, dipped his head once, and turned back to Jae-won with the same unbothered smile. He says the legal drafting is excellent. Sends his compliments to your team. The wine glass Amara was reaching for nearly left her grip entirely. She steadied it. Her eyes settled on Sungmin Oh. The unhurried smile, the leather folder, the flawless performance of a man fulfilling his role without a single visible flaw. He was not fulfilling his role. He was hollowing it out, word by word, sentence by sentence, and the man sitting at the head of that table trusted him too completely to see it happening. On a $5 billion deal, with his own brother holding the pen, Amara lifted her tray, turned from the table, and walked back toward the kitchen with even steps and a face that revealed absolutely nothing. It could still be an error, she told herself. Translators make judgment calls. This does not have to be what it looks like, but she had told herself that kind of story before. She knew exactly how it ended, and Amara Williams had already paid too high a price for believing comfortable lies. She pushed through the kitchen door and set the tray on the counter. Through the wall behind her, the low murmur of table 9 continued without pause. She needed to go back inside that room. She needed to be certain before she decided anything. Because what was at stake on her side of this was not abstract. It was Gloria's medication arriving on Thursday. It was the roof over both their heads. It was the only income she had been able to hold on to after everything else had been stripped away. But if what she was hearing was what she believed it was, then the most powerful man at that table was not simply being deceived. He was being dismantled, and the architect of it was sitting close enough to him to share his wine. Before we go any further, if you are watching and enjoying the story right now and you have not subscribed yet, kindly do that and hit that like button and turn on notifications. Because what Amara is about to do next, what she risks, what she discovers, and what one whisper in a room full of dangerous people sets in motion, you do not want to miss a single second of it. Now, let us get back to the story. Amara picked up a bread basket from the counter that nobody had requested. She needed a reason to walk back into that room. She needed to hear more before she made any decision that could cost her this position, because this was not simply a job she could afford to lose. Gloria Williams was breathing through her nights at St. Catherine's because of this job. The medication that arrived every Thursday morning existed because of this job. The thin but unbroken line between her mother and complete darkness was drawn in the wages Amara collected at the end of every week. So she lifted the bread basket, ran her palm once across her apron, and pushed back through the kitchen door. She was not being brave. She was being a daughter. But her ears were her own, and nobody at that table knew it. Amara eased back into the private dining area and placed the bread basket at the far edge of the table, without drawing a single glance. Sungmin was already speaking, his voice unhurried and assured, his German polished enough to pass without question in front of anyone who had not grown up inside the language. Amara had grown up inside the language. Klaus Richter was talking now, his pale eyes shifting between the document pages and Sungmin's face with the focused attention of a man determined to be understood correctly. I have to be direct about this. Section 7.3 of this contract assigns full legal jurisdiction to Korean courts. We had an explicit agreement on neutral international arbitration. My company cannot put its name to anything that strips away our legal protection on foreign soil. This is not a minor point. This is the kind of clause that ends negotiations. It was the kind of objection that demanded a serious response, the kind that required both parties to stop, address the issue honestly, and rebuild from a place of transparency. Sungmin listened with his chin slightly lowered. Then he turned to Jae-won, and his expression did not shift by a single degree. He says the contract is structured impressively, compliments the work your legal team put into it. Jae-won said nothing. He lifted his wine glass and drank. Amara pressed her back against the wall and felt something cold move through her chest. Sungmin had just received a formal deal breaker, a direct threat to walk away from the table, and handed his brother a compliment in its place. She kept her face empty and her body unmoving. You are nobody, she reminded herself. You are the shadow in the corner. You are the hand that refills a glass. You are not here. Klaus drew a breath and continued, his tone carrying the sharpened edge of a man who had already raised his concern and was beginning to understand why it kept vanishing without a trace. There is also the matter of the profit split. We shook hands on 50/50. The figure in this contract reads 60/40 in your favor. My board did not agree to that number and will not ratify anything built on it. I need to understand whether this was a drafting error or something done with intention. 60/40. This was a $5 billion negotiation. A 10% shift on a deal that size was not a rounding error. It was not a formatting oversight. It was not the kind of thing that happened by accident between two companies with legal teams on both sides. That 10% represented $500 million moving in the wrong direction. Quietly, cleanly, buried inside language that most people at most tables would never think to question. Sungmin absorbed every word, without a flicker of reaction. He turned to Jae-won with the same measured calm he had carried all evening. He says he is satisfied with the financial terms. Just wants proper documentation in place before the signing moves forward. Amara released the edge of the service trolley she had not realized she was gripping. The marks from her fingers stayed in her palm for a moment before fading. Sungmin had just taken the most serious objection Klaus had raised all night and delivered it to his brother as quiet cooperation. He had taken a man who was one sentence away from standing up and leaving, and made him sound eager to put his name on the page. And Jae-won, a man who had built an empire on the ability to read what was happening in a room, was sitting close enough to touch the person dismantling him and had no way of knowing it. Amara returned to the kitchen for the second time. She was not composed anymore. Her hands gave her away the moment the door closed behind her, a tremor running through both of them that she could not press flat no matter how hard she tried. She crossed to the sink and ran cold water over the inside of her wrists. Her mother had shown her that trick when she was 12, on a night the world had moved faster than a child could follow. Cold water and slow counting. Gloria had said, "For counts in, for counts out. Your body will catch up to your breath if you give it enough room." She counted now. For in, for out. Think. She told herself when the tremor began to ease. Think straight. $63 in her account. Thursday delivery. Gloria's face on the bad days. The ones where the pain climbed higher than the medication could reach, and she tried to keep it hidden because she did not want her daughter carrying it too. Then she thought about Klaus Richter at that table. A man who had crossed an ocean to finalize a $5 billion agreement. A man holding a pen above a contract that no longer said what he had agreed to, and with no way of knowing it, because the one person he was relying on to tell him the truth was the one person in the room with the most reason to lie. And she thought about what it felt like to trust someone that completely. To put your name on something because the person beside you said it was safe. To discover afterward, when the damage had already set, that the trust had been the weapon all along. She did not need to imagine that feeling. She had lived inside it for 3 years. Amara turned off the tap, dried her hands, and walked back toward the dining room. She was 3 steps past the curtain when Sungmin raised his eyes. Not toward Klaus, not toward his brother, not toward the documents on the table. Toward her. It lasted no more than 2 seconds. But inside those 2 seconds, something moved between them that settled in Amara's stomach the way a stone settles when it drops into water with no current. Straight down and staying there. It was not the routine glance of a man registering a waitress at the edge of his vision. It was a focused attention of someone whose instincts had just delivered a message. Someone who had spent enough time in rooms where information was the most valuable currency to recognize when a person nearby might be carrying some that belonged to him. Sungmin held the look for 1 breath longer. Then a different kind of smile appeared. Not the easy, open expression he had been using at the table all evening. This one was smaller, more considered, built entirely for her. He excused himself from the table in Korean, stood without hurry, and crossed the room toward the service area where Amara stood, rearranging items that required no rearranging. He stopped beside her, not in front. Beside. The way a person positions themselves when they need a conversation to look like nothing from across a room. He lifted a glass from the trolley and turned it slowly, as though inspecting the rim. When he spoke, his voice carried no further than her ear. "You have been in this room a long time tonight," he said. "For someone in your position." Amara kept her hands moving. "It is my section." "Of course." He returned the glass to the trolley without sound. "My brother is not an ordinary man." The people around him learned very quickly that the wisest thing they can do is direct their attention toward their own responsibilities. A pause, precisely placed. "I trust you understand what I am saying." Amara said nothing. Sungmin allowed the silence its full weight. Then he walked back to the table, settled into his chair, and resumed the evening as though the last 90 seconds had not occurred. Amara remained where she was. He had confirmed nothing, admitted nothing. But a man does not cross a room to deliver that particular message to a waitress unless he has already concluded the waitress is more than she is presenting herself to be. And Sungmin, had not lasted this long in the world. He occupied by trusting instincts that led him in the wrong direction. He knew, not the full shape of it, not the exact details, but enough to warn her. And men like Sungmin, issued warnings once. She had a decision to make. Not later. Right now, she could complete the shift, walk out at midnight, tell herself that what happened at table 9 was a situation she had no standing to involve herself in. She could do all of that. It was the reasonable choice, the safe choice, the choice that kept Gloria's Thursday delivery arriving on schedule. Or she could do something else entirely. She looked at Klaus Richter working to the final pages of the contract, a man extending the full weight of his trust toward a translator who was using that trust as a tool against him. She looked at Jae-won sitting at the head of the table with the stillness of someone who had survived every kind of threat his world had ever produced. Every kind except the one that was sitting close enough to his right to share his glass. Then Klaus set down the page he had been reading. He straightened the contract in front of him, and he asked the question he had been building toward for the last 2 hours. "Before I sign, one final confirmation. The profit split remains 50-50, as we agreed from the beginning. That figure has not changed." "Correct." Sungmin did not hesitate. He turned to Jae-won without a pause, without a glance at the document, without a single beat of delay. He is ready to sign. No outstanding concerns. Klaus picked up the pen. Jae-won reached for his. The contract sat open between them. Clean pages, precise language, and buried inside it a set of figures and clauses that would redirect $500 million away from a man who believed he was signing something else entirely. The room had never been this quiet. Amara felt the silence press against her chest the way pressure builds before something gives way. "This is not your table," said one voice inside her. This is not your deal. This is not your life, and these are not your people. You know exactly what this is, said the other voice, the one that had been awake since the moment she first heard Klaus speak in German. And you know exactly what happens next if you stay quiet. She had 4 seconds before that pen reached the page. She lifted the wine bottle from the service station, walked the length of the room to J1's side of the table, leaned forward with the practiced ease of someone who had performed this exact motion without drawing attention 100 times that shift, and in a voice so low it barely existed, so quiet it could pass for nothing at all. She spoke directly into his ear. Mr. O, your translator is lying to you. The German just asked whether the profit split is still 50-50. He did not say he is ready to sign. He is asking for confirmation before he commits. And the clause in section 7.3, he has raised a formal objection to it twice tonight. Both times your brother told you he was offering praise. He was not. J10 did not move, not his hands, not his posture, not his breathing, but his eyes, careful, slow, carrying the full weight of a man who had learned decades ago that what shows on the surface and what is happening underneath are rarely the same thing. Moved from the contract to Amara's face with precision that made everything else in the room feel distant. 3 full seconds. Are you certain of this? Not a question. The tone of a man who needed the answer to be yes, and had already begun to believe that it was. I have understood every word spoken at this table tonight, Amara said. Every single word. 1 more second. Then Jiwon opened his fingers and let the pen settle against the tablecloth. The sound it made was almost nothing at all. But in that room, in that moment, it arrived at a verdict. Across the table, Sungmin's eyes moved to the pen, then to his brother's face. Then, for a fraction of a moment, so brief it barely registered, to Amara. And the expression he had held without a single crack through the entire evening came apart at the edges. Just slightly. Just enough. Sungmin recovered fast. That was the thing about men who operated the way he did. They did not stay exposed for long. The fracture in his expression sealed itself within seconds, and by the time Jiwon turned toward him, Sungmin had already reassembled everything. The posture, the calm, the face that gave nothing away. But Jiwon, had spent 40 years in rooms where everything was performance. He knew one when he saw it. He placed both hands flat on the table. No urgency, no visible anger. The stillness of a man whose decision had already been made on the inside and was now simply waiting for the outside to catch up. Sungmin, he said, quietly, in Korean. Sungmin looked up. Yes. Asked Mr. Richter to repeat his exact position on the profit split. I want to hear it one more time before anything else happens at this table. Something crossed Sungmin's face. Small, quick, gone. Of course, he said. He turned to Klaus and spoke in German. Amara was still positioned at J1's side of the table, the wine bottle resting in both hands, her body angled toward the glasses as though refilling them was the only thing on her mind. She caught every word Sungmin sent across the table. He did not ask Klaus to repeat his position on the profit split. He asked whether Klaus felt the evening had been productive overall. Amara's grip on the bottle tightened by a fraction. Even now, even with the pen set down and the temperature of the room completely changed, Sungmin was still working, still redirecting, still trying to push the outcome toward wherever he needed it to land. Klaus answered in German. His voice carried the measured firmness of a man who had stretched his patience as far as it would go and could feel the edges of it. Productive is not the word I would use. I have raised the same 2 concerns repeatedly tonight and received responses that had nothing to do with what I asked. The profit split in this document is not what we agreed. The arbitration clause was changed without my knowledge. I came here prepared to finalize this deal. I cannot put my signature on what is currently in front of me. I need real answers before this conversation goes any further. Sungmin absorbed every word without a flicker. He turned to J1 with the same expression he had worn all evening. He says the meeting has been largely positive. A few minor documentation points to tidy up, but nothing that should delay the signing. The room did not just go quiet. It went still in the particular way rooms go still when something that cannot be repaired is just broken. Jae-won looked at Sung-min for 3 full seconds without speaking. Then his eyes moved to Amara. Tell me what he said. Not a request. The tone of a man opening a door to a trap. He finished building before the evening began. Amara held his gaze and kept her voice level. He said the word productive does not apply to tonight. He said he has raised the same 2 issues multiple times, and the answers he received did not address what he asked. He said the profit split in this contract is not what was agreed between the 2 of you. He said the arbitration clause was altered without his knowledge or consent. He said he came here ready to finalize everything, but he cannot sign what is currently on that table. He needs real answers before this goes any further. Not one person at the table moved. Jae-won turned back to face his brother. And Sung-min, for the first time all evening, had nothing left to place in front of his face. His hand moved toward his water glass. It was not steady. Sung-min, Jae-won spoke the name the way you speak something you have been carrying, without understanding its full weight, and have just felt every gram of it at once. Hyung, Sung-min began. Do not. The 2 words arrived without volume and without heat, which made them land harder than anything louder would have. Do not tell me it was a misunderstanding. Do not tell me legal German is difficult to render precisely. Do not tell me you were simplifying for clarity. A pause that lasted exactly long enough. I have one question. Who sent you to this table with those instructions? Klaus Richter sat across from them, absorbing the atmosphere the way men absorb it when they have enough experience to read a room through silence and posture alone. Understanding that what was happening between the old brothers had moved somewhere no contract could follow. Sung-min sat without speaking. Then something in his shoulders gave way. Quietly, without drama. The particular collapse of a man who has run out of ground to stand on and has finally accepted it. 6 months ago, he said. In Korean now, every layer of performance gone. Just a voice. Just a younger brother with nowhere left to go. People inside the company approached me. Senior people. They said the direction Jae-won was taking the business was damaging its future. They said this deal needed to land differently to protect what the company had built. They told me all I had to do was guide the translation. Their names. Sung-min gave them. Jae-won received each one without any change in his expression. But something moved behind his eyes, the specific quality of stillness that belongs to a man storing information in a place where it will be addressed with complete and unhurried thoroughness. Guide the translation, Jae-won repeated. His voice had dropped to something almost gentle. And if I had signed tonight, if Klaus had signed tonight, what came after that? Sung-min said nothing. The silence carried the answer, because Amara already knew it. She had known it since the moment Sung-min had spoken those words to Klaus in German earlier in the evening. The words that had locked her hand on the wine bottle before any of this had properly begun. The words that made clear this was never only about redirecting figures on a page. That the contract was not the destination. That Jae-won, put his name on those pages, was only supposed to be the opening move in something larger. This $5 billion deal had never been just about the $5 billion. It had never been just about the money at all. Jae-won sat with that knowledge for 10 seconds that felt considerably longer than 10 seconds. Then he did something nobody at the table expected. He turned to Klaus Richter and spoke in German. Not smoothly, not with confidence. Each word came out with the careful weight of someone excavating a language from a part of themselves they had not visited in years. Grammar stripped to its bones. Accent unmistakably Korean. The effort visible in every syllable. But the meaning arrived without any ambiguity at all. Mr. Richter, I am sorry. Tonight, I did not hear your true words. Not once. I want to begin again. With honesty, from the very first page. Klaus stared at him. For a moment, he was completely still. Then something that had been held under pressure in his expression for the better part of 2 hours came loose. Not loudly, not with any visible show of feeling, but in the quiet way that a body releases tension when it finally understands that the danger is past. He exhaled once. Then he nodded, slowly, with the full weight of someone extending trust across a table to a man who had just done something difficult to earn it. Jae-won rose from his chair. He fastened the single button of his jacket with the unhurried precision of a man who understood that how you stand up from a table finishes the sentence your words began. He looked at Sung Min. "Leave this room." Sung Min stood without a word. He took nothing from the table. He did not look at Klaus. He did not look at Amara. He crossed the velvet curtain, pushed through it, and disappeared. His footsteps moved down the corridor and faded in the way footsteps fade when the person making them has understood they are not coming back. Jae-won watched the curtain settle. Then he picked up his phone and made a call. 3 sentences. Amara caught enough Korean to follow. He was directing someone to pull everything connected to the name Sung Min had provided. Every account, every contact, every exchange from the past 6 months. He needed it before morning. He ended the call and placed the phone face down on the table. Then he turned to Amara. She had not moved from where she stood. Wine bottle in hand, apron straight, held together with the discipline of someone who had spent years training herself not to let what was happening on the inside reach the surface. Because every time it had, the cost had been more than she could recover from quickly. "Sit down," Jae-won said. Amara glanced at the empty chair. "I am still on shift," she said. "Your shift ended the moment you spoke into my ear." Jae-won replied. "Sit down." She sat. The chair still held warm from the person who had occupied it all evening. Klaus watched her from across the table with the focused attention of someone rebuilding his understanding of the last 2 hours from the ground up, including his understanding of who the woman with the wine bottle actually was. Jae-won pulled out his own chair and lowered himself into it, not with the controlled precision he had carried into the room at the start of the evening, with the particular heaviness of someone who has just absorbed something that will require a long time to fully settle. "Who are you?" he said. Not a challenge, not suspicion. The genuine weight of a man trying to understand how a woman in a waitress apron had walked into the center of fraud that his own people had not detected, and taken it apart with nothing but her voice. Amara looked at her hands against the white linen. "Amara Williams. I cover table 9. That is your name and your section," Jae-won said. "I asked who you are." She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up. "My father gave 20 years to cultural liaison work between the United States government and European institutions," she said. "We relocated every 2 or 3 years through my childhood. Germany was home for 3 of those years. Long enough that the language stopped being something I learned and became something I simply carried inside me. The way certain places get into you when you are young enough that you do not notice it happening. And after," Klaus said from across the table, quietly, not pushing, just present. Amara glanced at him briefly, then back at her hands. "I built something," she said. "Corporate translation work, international contract interpretation, simultaneous conference work, certified, established, 8 years of reputation constructed carefully." A pause. "I had a business partner. For years of working together through situations difficult enough that I believed I knew exactly who he was." Another pause, longer. "He was moving client funds into accounts I knew nothing about, using my professional credentials to shift money that was not his, signing documents in my name that I had not examined carefully because I trusted him to be protecting what we had both built." The table held its silence. "When it came apart, my name was on every document, my credentials on every account. My license was suspended through the investigation. By the time I was cleared, the damage to my reputation had already set. No agency return calls. No firm that had used my services for years acknowledged knowing me." She looked at the linen. "My mother's diagnosis arrived 4 months after that. Her treatment at St. Catherine's is not inexpensive. This position at the Obsidian Room asked no questions about my history. So I took it. No bitterness in it. No performance. The flat, direct delivery of someone who has lived alongside a hard truth long enough that describing it no longer cost them the way it once did." Jae-won looked at her for a long moment. "Tonight," he said finally, "you could have heard everything you heard at this table and walked out at midnight and collected your wages and said nothing to anyone, ever." "Yes," Amara said. "So why didn't you?" She looked at him directly. "Because someone once did to me exactly what was being done to you tonight. Sat close enough to be trusted. changed the meaning of every word. And I spent years after that wishing there had been one person in that room who understood what was happening and chose to say something before the damage was finished. She let that land. I was not going to be the person who stayed quiet while someone else started counting those same years. Klaus reached into his jacket, removed a card, placed it on the table in front of her. No ceremony, no framing, the simple directness of a man who had made up his mind. My organization covers 14 countries, he said in careful English. We retain interpreters continuously for this level of work. In my experience, a brief glance toward the space Sung Min had vacated. Finding someone who carries a meaning across without adjusting it to suit an agenda is far rarer than finding someone who simply speaks the language. Amara looked at the card without reaching for it. Jae-won's hand moved his jacket. A second card settled beside the first. I operate across markets and languages I do not speak, he said. Tonight showed me exactly what that exposure costs when the wrong person sits between me and what is actually being said. He held her gaze. I need someone at that table whose only purpose is accuracy. Nothing beyond that. Amara looked at both cards lying side by side on the white linen. 2 doors, both of them further from where she had been standing when the evening started than she could have imagined 12 hours ago. My license is still suspended, she said. My legal team will look at the basis of that suspension, Jae-won said. If it was imposed on the strength of conduct that has since been established as belonging to someone else, it has no foundation worth defending. That conversation can happen. A pause. But that is a conversation for tomorrow. Tonight, I am asking something simpler. Amara waited. Are you willing to return to this table? With Klaus. With clean documentation. With negotiation handled the way tonight's should have been handled from the first sentence. The question sat between them, without pressure. Amara thought about Gloria at St. Catherine's, about Thursday, about the corridor of that hospital that she knew well enough to navigate in complete darkness, about her father, Dr. Amara Williams, who had spent 2 decades helping people find each other across every distance that language could create, who had told her, from the time she was old enough to sit still and listen, that what she carried was not a career, it was a responsibility. And responsibilities did not disappear, because life made them inconvenient to hold. You carried them, even when carrying them was the most demanding thing available to you. She picked up both cards. She called Gloria from the car park at 11:52. Her mother picked up before the second ring finished, which told Amara everything she needed to know about how Gloria's night had gone. The pain had kept her awake, which meant she'd been lying in that room measuring the minutes until a familiar voice arrived on the other end of the line. How was the shift? Gloria said. Amara stood in the empty car park and looked up at the city sky, orange and starless. The particular shade of sky turns above a city that generates too much light to show anything beyond itself. Unlike any other shift I have worked, she said. That tells me nothing. I know. Amara turned the 2 cards over in her hand. Mom, I need to tell you what happened tonight. And she did. All of it. Not the edited version she used when she was trying to keep the weight of things from landing too heavily on Gloria. The full version. The table. The German rising back through her after years of lying sealed. The mistranslations building one on top of the other. Sung Min's quiet warning in the corner of the room. The moment the pen moved toward the page. The whisper. The pen coming back down. Gloria listened without a single interruption. When Amara finished, the quiet on the line had the texture of something being turned over carefully before any response was given. You want to know whether to accept what they offered, Gloria said. I want to know what you think. Another moment of quiet. Your father carried fear into every room he ever worked in, Gloria said. People never knew that because he was skilled at not showing it. But I knew every mediation, every negotiation, every table full of people who had stopped trusting each other and needed someone to stand between them and make the language safe again. He walked into all of them afraid of missing something, afraid of failing the people depending on him, afraid of being the reason it fell apart instead of the reason it held. Amara said nothing. She was listening the way you listen when someone is handing you something you did not realize you had been waiting for. I asked him once how he kept walking into those rooms when the fear was at present, Gloria continued. And he told me, Glow, the fear does not leave. You simply reach a point where what is waiting on the other side of the door matters more to you than what is sitting in your chest before you open it. The city moved around Amara in the dark. That man tonight, Gloria said, the one you stopped, if you had stayed quiet, what happens to him? I cannot say exactly, Amara said, but the contract was designed to take from him. And what Sung Min said earlier in that room suggested the contract was not where it was going to end. And you spoke up anyway, understanding what it might cost you. Yes. Then you settled this question hours ago, Gloria said. In that room, holding that bottle. The only thing remaining is whether you honor the answer you already gave or spend the night persuading yourself out of it. A pause. Come tomorrow morning, early, before the ward gets busy. Bring real coffee, not whatever comes out of that machine by the lifts, and bring those cards. I want to read the names myself. Amara laughed, small and genuine and completely unguarded. 8 o'clock, she said. 7:45, Gloria said. I've been awake since before 3. The line went quiet. Amara remained in the car park after the call ended. The city carried on around her the way it always did, indifferent and continuous, full of people whose evenings were proceeding along their own lines, entirely unaffected by what had taken place inside the obsidian room. She looked at the 2 cards one final time. Then she tucked them into her apron pocket, next to the pen she had used all evening to take down orders from people who had never once looked at her face. And she walked out of that car park as something she had not been when she arrived for her shift. Not yet the person she was working back toward. Not anymore the person she had compressed herself into becoming. Something between the two, still taking shape. A woman who had opened a door inside herself that she had kept locked for 3 years and used what was behind it to tell the truth in a room that had been built entirely around a lie. That was enough for one night. Everything else could grow from there. There are people who spend years learning to take up less space, who make themselves smaller and quieter and less visible because the world once made that feel like the only way to stay safe, who do it so thoroughly and for so long that the person they were before the shrinking starts to feel like someone they once read about rather than someone they actually were. But who we are does not dissolve just because we stop displaying it. It remains, and when the moment arrives, as it does arrive, for those who are paying attention, when the room requires us to show up as ourselves completely, we find that the years of waiting did not wear it down. They preserved it. Amara Williams walked away from the obsidian room that night with 2 cards in her pocket, and one thing she had not carried in a very long time, the knowledge that when the moment came, she had not looked away. She had spoken, and that before any contract was renegotiated, before any license was restored, before any door that had been closed was open again, was where everything that mattered began. Because life does not always place us where we belong. Sometimes it puts us somewhere too small for who we are, and we survive it. We fold ourselves down, and we keep going because we have to. But what you are built to do does not disappear, because life buried it. It waits, and when the moment arrives, it will arrive. The only question is whether you are willing to show up as yourself completely. Amara was willing, and everything changed. If this story reached something inside you, and if it reminded you of a version of yourself you have been keeping hidden, or someone in your life who is still waiting for their moment, share it with them today, not tomorrow, today. And if you want to be here every time a new story like this one is told, subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications, because every single week a new story arrives, a new person, a new moment where the truth refuses to stay quiet, and you do not want to miss what happens next.